I literally just came off like a speaking engagement piece at a convention 5 times,
Yeah,
and my friend, I get introduced as Dr. Robbie Kroger,
yeah.
and my friends like to say I'll come off stage and they say, "Did you tell the audience that you're not a proper doctor, right? You just like if a medical emergency happened, you wouldn't be able to help anybody."
Well, I can help. I'm not sure it'd be a successful procedure, but I'll give it a go.
I will say this: you know how you have like you build up perceptions of people in your mind. And given the topic that we're going to discuss, ethics, ethological theories, I totally assumed you to be a wizened, old, white haired, glasses professor, that was going to. And here you are, like me, probably my age.
I'm 46
No
this
gray
year.
hairs yet.
Yeah, no. Well, they're coming. When you work in a space like this, you can feel them growing. Um, but it's a challenging space, but one that I enjoy. And I don't know if I end up with white hair and a big beard or something, I'll be fine with that.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, Dr. Ben Allen, I'm going to introduce you properly because if I didn't, it would go on for probably 20 minutes without me even introducing you. Uh, Welcome to the Origins Foundation podcast. I know this is going to be a fascinating conversation. I apologize it's taken us so long to connect on this, and it's just part of your schedule and part of my schedule to try and get two very busy individuals to connect, and also that we're halfway around the world opposite each other to get time
It
zones
has an
connected
effect.
to. Uh, Ben, introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What is your position in life?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, and I'm grateful to be here and looking forward to our conversation. I grew up in a home, like a science home. My father is a wildlife biologist who spent most of his life working on dingoes, which is Australia's largest predator. So the rest of the world might be familiar with lions or tigers or bears. Australia's biggest predator is a 15-kilo dog.
Hmm.
Um, so he worked
Very
on
effective,
Australia's.
though, as well, right?
Oh yeah,
Super effective predator.
it's a good predator. Like it does a lot of good things. Like very effective predator. But that's the largest we've got. And so my father grew up as a wildlife biologist specializing on dingo. So I just grew up doing this stuff. In fact, I went for a job interview many years ago in my 30s, and I submitted as part of my resume a photo of me as a 6-year-old working with the people that were interviewing me. And I put in my application that I had 25 years experience and
Oh,
submitted my
that is
photo.
hilarious.
And it got a good laugh. I didn't get the job, but it got a good laugh that we'd been doing this stuff for quite some time. So I just grew up in that space and went to uni, got the degrees and all that sort of thing, started working as a wildlife scientist, pest animal scientist in different fields, cut my teeth out of university on insects and sugarcane and doing experiments on how you stop insects from eating sugarcane, which is really good training. And then went back to sort of the mammal side of things and working out in the bush, which I like the most.
Mm.
And since that time, I've been working on dingoes almost exclusively for a decade. And then for the last
Jeez, you
10
took the
years,
old man's mantle up, huh?
I just did it. Yeah, yeah. We're a tag team there for a while when Dad was still at work. He's retired now and just spends his days fishing. And I've broadened out and still do a lot of work on dingoes, but a lot of other stuff too. So after a decade at university, made my way to associate professor and ran the wildlife research group at the university. And now I'm in the
Which
private
university has
sector.
that been? What
That's the
university was that?
University of Southern Queensland. In Australia, there's roughly 30 odd unis. There's a handful of the big ones that most people would know that we call the sandstone unis. And then there's a good couple dozen what they call regional universities that have a smaller sort of scope of the things that they do. But they typically punch above their weight in the work that they do. And so I worked for one of those regional universities, leading the wildlife research group there. Didn't do any teaching. We were just full-time wildlife research on all sorts of different animals. And
Nice.
that allowed me to travel the world and do a whole bunch of things on all sorts of species and interact. And that's sort of where we land in a conversation like this, because in the wildlife management space, not just straight up conservation or biology or physiology, but in the actual management of these animals, a lot of the issues that we face in Australia are common around the world for all sorts of complex species. And it became apparent to me quite quickly that issues associated with killing animals for various reasons is always one of those hot button things. So we spent a lot of time in that space, and we've been doing that for a few years now.
And you said you're in the private space now?
Yeah, so now I left the university and work in the private sector for an environmental consultancy company. And we do all those things. So sometimes you're spraying weeds or trapping feral animals and euthanizing them. Sometimes you're doing research projects. You're radio tracking flying foxes, or you're catching koalas, or you're shooting feral pigs, or whatever. So in that private sector space, you can interact with, government and industry in the sort of planning processes and stuff like legislative space. And then sometimes you get to do the fun stuff still and be outside. And I used to always joke with people that I had the best job in the world, which was get paid to go four-wheel driving, camping, fishing, hunting, sleeping under the stars. It's like you're a little boy and you grow up and you're still getting paid to do it. So it's good fun.
Yeah, it's funny what you just mentioned. Your track is exactly very similar to mine. I became a professor. I was a professor for 6 years, literally just got tenure and left. And I was hired to be the chief scientist of the BP oil spill from Texas to Florida, stood up $1 billion restoration framework and really got an understanding of like, whoa, this is how the world works. And this is like much, much higher level of politics and environmental restoration, environmental conservation, ideas and work and policies. And then I got hired as a consultant. I was the chief scientist of an environmental consulting company. And I did that for 9 years. And was in charge of building oyster reefs and reestablishing dune systems and beneficial use of marsh material, of dredge material to build marshes back, buying land, habitat management and restoration of those lands for gopher tortoises, longleaf pine savannas.
Well, we should talk. We do all those things, our company. It's good fun. And the management side really interests me because it's not just the biology. You have to manage these animals in a way. And then that means you've got to pull in more than just wildlife. You have to pull in people, and you've got to pull in policy, and you've got to do all that stuff. And I was very much interested in the applied science, how you do these things, what the outcomes are of human intervention. Those are the things that interested me.
Ben, when we first started interacting, you said to me, the reason you started to write these kinds of papers is you got sick and tired of being on the back foot. You got sick and tired of being like, why am I defending this thing that I know is true?
Yeah.
I need to like figure out my argument. And again, you have this vision of who you're going to talk to and who he is and what he does. I assumed you were a professor of ethics.
No.
Given what you just said, no, like this is actually in my brain. Again, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but in my brain, given all the work I've done, given the experience I've had since I was 6 years old, I've seen this need for humans to be a part of the system. We've been a part of the system for millennia, or however, depending on how you see the world.
Whenever humans were invented, we've been a part of the system.
We've been a part of the system.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've read any. One of the guys that reached out to you that when we had talked was John Nash, and John Nash out of the UK. I don't know if you've read any of the stuff that he's done. He's got he uses a cave as an example, and how ethics are built within the cave. And when humans are in the cave, then you have these ethics that you have to you sort of be aware of and think about. But when you step out of the cave, there are no ethics any longer. And it's just the world that it is.
We play, sometimes I do like some educational programs for schools, like from K through 12. And you do some wildlife management sessions. And we play what I call death games with the kids. And you say, who'd like to play some death games? And all the kids are like, yeah, we want to play some death games. And I sort of set the scene for them by saying, have you ever watched a documentary where you have an impala or a springbok or something running away and a lion's chasing them? And you go, who wants the lion to win? And half the class puts up their hand, they want the lion to win. You say, all right, well, if the lion wins, that springbok is going to die. And it's going to die a very horrible death. It's going to get eaten by a lion. And you pause for a moment and there's like, oh, that doesn't sound very nice, the kids. You go, well, who wants the springbok to win? And then the other half of the class puts up their hand and say, I want the springbok to win. Like, all right, well, if the springbok gets away, that lion's going to starve. And those little baby cubs that you see, they're going to starve to death. And they're going to die a very horrible death. And you pause for a second, and then I make the point, someone has to die. There's no scenario where everybody gets to live. Someone has to die. And this is Mother Nature. Someone has to die. So who wants to play some death games? And then they all scream and say yes. And we play what we call Red Rover, where you have one person trying to tag the whole class. And you fiddle with the numbers of how many taggers there are and how many runners there are. And you can teach people principles around predator-prey relationships. And if you have an unbalanced system, the game's no fun. So they learn very quickly how important it is to have predators and prey balanced. And if you have just one and not the other, it's not going to work. But we do that, we make that point, we call them death games, and I emphasize the fact that someone has to die, because when they go out into the real world, this is what Mother Nature does. Somebody has to die. There's no scenario where everybody gets to live. And wildlife managers essentially have to play that game or orchestrate that game, whether you're a farmer dealing with the animals on your farm, or whether you're a national park or reserve manager or a policy officer, you're playing these death games. You don't get to choose if animals live or die. You just have to choose which animals live or die and when and how. And that's the job of a wildlife manager. So I enjoy that space because it helps to, conserve biodiversity, maintain ecosystems, and give animals a good life while they're alive.
Ben, I know you've thought about this a lot. I think about this a lot too. So I don't want to bias, and I don't think I would, in what I would say to what you think. But if I pushed you and said, why are we in this situation in which death is bad?
Man,
or death doesn't occur. It's not something that doesn't happen. Why are we here?
I haven't spent a lot of time from a research point of view, I haven't spent a lot of time in that space. But if I was to speculate, I would probably say it's got something to do with human populations becoming more urbanized over the years. And there's just a bit of a detachment from the reality of sort of nature. I'm not the first person to say that, and there's much more smarter people out me that can talk about that kind of thing. But my sense is that we've just become a little bit disconnected from life and death. You only have to go back a generation, and our parents or grandparents would have been killing their own chickens on the farm, or having a dairy cow that they used to milk, or maybe they went out hunting to get some meat or whatever. They still do that in a lot of places, right? And I'm talking largely about Western cultures here, because other cultures are still very connected to the land. But in sort of Western society, at least, we've become a little bit disconnected from that. And so just, through no individual fault of their own, people just don't realize how sort of nature works as a generalization. I mean, there's funny YouTube clips of, people not knowing that lemons come from lemon trees, or that milk comes from female cows, stuff like that. And you can watch people who just didn't know these things. So I think probably a big part of it is that we've just become a little bit disconnected as Western societies more generally. Mm-hmm. And you see that in people's sort of urge to connect with wildlife. Who doesn't love a great BBC documentary about wildlife? They're very popular. And when people see a little bird nesting, on a high-rise building in the middle of the city, everybody's all over it. They love it. So I think there's a sort of innate need to enjoy animals. A lot of people enjoy that stuff. But when it gets to the killing bit, we don't like that. That seems a bit rough. That doesn't look nice. In fact, one of the motivations for this paper I wrote a couple of years ago around the reasons humans kill animals is what it points out is that every single human, regardless of where you live or what you eat or how you choose to live, you're a part of that food web. You can't get out of the food web. And even if you were the most vegan of vegans, eating mushrooms and living in a cave, you're still taking up a cave that something else would have lived in, and you're still eating something that something else would have eaten, and you're killing them indirectly through competition. You just can't get out of that. Maybe when Elon Musk builds a space station, we might get out of the food web. But until that day, we are all stuck on this food web, and we're personally involved in animal killing, directly or indirectly.
There's two things that I think blend into it, and I'm very aware of it. I'm very privy to it. I'm engaged in it 24/7, and you probably aren't as much in it as I am. I'm noticing in social media now, obviously the development, and we're in this era of AI right now, and this creation of these videos and these photos that are just, from a practical perspective, like, this is ludicrous. This doesn't make any sense. But it's championing the narrative of, a leopard has an impala fawn and raises it.
Yeah.
And people, you go into the comments and it's like, I've got a stock standard AI response on my phone now.
Yeah.
I just plug it in and I say, AI is making us all dumber.
Yeah.
You guys aren't thinking. There's no research. There's no, is this real? Is this not real? You just hook, line, and sinker believing. Which, in its microcosm of AI, which is now obviously very much larger than a microcosm, I think the thing that pushes me every day, and I think pushes you to talk about the things that you talk about, is the narrative that's coming out of these big non-profits around the world of save the
whatever.
X.
Yeah.
Polar bear, wolf, grizzly, elephant. You don't have to save the elephant anymore. We don't need to. You can't give an elephant away for free in South Africa right now.
Yeah. Who would want one? Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody wants one, which is...
in some ways, they're well-intentioned, and there's a whole bunch of people who aren't well-intentioned, but let's be generous and say they're well-intentioned. Nobody wants to see animals hurt or whatever, and it's coming from a good place. The trouble with that kind of thinking, though, when the pendulum swings too far, it's actually very bad for fauna, and it's bad for wildlife, and it has a negative consequence that means you will not get the thing that you achieve, because animals have to die. It's that rule. You cannot live in a world where they don't die. So by taking away, you think of that lion springbok thing, by saving one, you're killing the other. You just can't get out of that. And there's no way around it. It's the laws of physics. You can do all you want. There's even moves like across the world and I don't know, sometimes I feel like they're tongue-in-cheek or they're just philosophers hypothesizing, but you dig a bit deeper and you're like, no, there's really support behind these things, where they want to herbivorize predators, genetically engineer them.
I had them on the podcast. Them on the podcast. And I was like, guys, I had them on the podcast just to let's have this ludicrous discussion.
Yeah. All right. So to the extent that they achieve what they want, bye-bye lions, bye-bye leopards, bye-bye everything that eats meat. The biodiversity you're trying to conserve will disappear. The only reason a leopard looks like a leopard is because it eats other things. If you made it eat sheep, it would not look like a leopard. It would look like a sheep. So the teeth would disappear, the spots would disappear, the long legs would disappear. It wouldn't be a leopard. So if your objective is to preserve biodiversity or the animals that you see out there right now, if that's the objective that you want to keep, you can't do something like that. We'll all just be sheep. Or there's people who speculate that there'll only be 3 animals left: humans, sheep, and wheat, or something. Like there are only 3 organisms left in the environment if you go down this road. So Again, society may choose that they want to avoid the harm is a higher priority than preserving biodiversity. And you're like, okay, if you want to go down that road, you can have a harm-free place, but you will not have biodiversity. You won't have the species and animals and plants that you see. If you want to keep those things, you have to have harm or death or killing or the pain and suffering that goes with it. There's this other talk I give every now and again, like a seminar, called Why Animals Must Die and Humans Should Kill Them. An intentionally provocative title, I suppose. But
I would say so.
but again, it's trying to point out that animals have to die and why they should die and why humans should be involved in it. And one of we call them the four arguments. One of the arguments in there is what we call the evolutionary argument, which is you have to have these forces, like this lion, impala, predator-prey type stuff. You have to have these forces operating in order to generate the speciation or the great diversity that we see in life. And species grow horns because they're trying to defend from a predator. The predator gets long legs and sharp teeth because they're trying to get past the horns. And the predator and prey are always in this arms race over avoiding predation or being able to get past the defenses. So that's the only reason species exist, is because of the harm and the killing that occurs. Now, if you take away that, or you try to separate that because we're worried about the harm, and we do this in conservation programs all the time, and plenty in Australia, where you put up a big fence and you'll get rid of the predators and you try and encourage the endangered species on the inside to grow, and they do quite well in the absence of predation. And as soon as they get moved outside the fence, they get vacuumed up by predators because they haven't learned to deal with the harm.
Yeah.
And they just get eaten. And so now research in that part of, like in that discipline, is around how can we introduce a little bit of harm to train these guys so that when they go out into the wide world, they know how to deal with a predator. To put a full stop on that point, you have to have the harm. You have to have the killing.
Well, even with cheetahs, right? So we just did a massive. We did the world's largest cheetah relocation project last year as a nonprofit. Amazing. 17 cheetah from South Africa to Mozambique. The cheetah we wanted were lion savvy cheetahs. Yeah. Because if they weren't, they're like,
dead.
Hey, don't worry about it. We don't know what you are, but we're going to keep eating. Well, no, the lion's going to come and smack you, kill you, and eat you and the prey item that you had.
Yeah. So you need it. If you take away the harm and the killing and the pain and the suffering part out of the story, you lose species. So I fear that a big push towards, risk aversion or harm aversion, we don't want animals to be stressed or hurt or whatever, ultimately leads in species extinctions and loss of biodiversity. So we have to find a way, society, to live with that and be comfortable with that. Now, that's not to say that, these things are just carte blanche, you go do what you want to animals. That's certainly not what we're suggesting. But you've got to be comfortable with death and killing and the pain that goes along with that and the suffering that goes along with that, because it's just how the world works.
Ben, what made you... I want to dig in a little bit to understand, like I already mentioned that you just got sick and tired of being on the defensive and decided to go on the offensive. What made you go down this sort of challenging of the ethics route? Because really let's be honest, nobody had ever decided to challenge that, right? Everyone was like, whoa, I don't want to get into this ethics argument because how can I actually defend from an ethics perspective killing something?
Yeah, what was obvious to me was that welfare was being used as a Trojan horse for ethical arguments. So we essentially say, it's about the welfare. We don't want you to use, in Australia, a common debate is around poison, 1080 use for control of dingoes, wild dogs, foxes and cats. We use poison. We throw it out, not with reckless abandon, but we throw out a lot of 1080 in Australia. And people say, we don't like that. We say, all right, well, let's not use 1080. How about I just shoot them in the head? I'll do a bullet in the head. No, we don't want that either. You're like, well, what do you mean? I just gave it perfect welfare. Lights out, instantly, didn't feel a thing. Objectively perfect welfare. Well, no, I don't want you to shoot it. I just don't want you to kill it in the first place. You go, okay, well, now we're having an ethics argument. We're not having a welfare argument. You're not really interested in welfare, most of the time, a lot of the time, it's not a welfare issue. We're interested in an ethical issue. I just don't want you to kill it. Factory farming, that sort of stuff, it's not about killing the animal. It's, I just don't want you to have the animal in the first place. You shouldn't be eating it. So all the efforts, factory farming might do to improve welfare for animals are not going to satisfy someone who's ethically opposed to you eating the animal in the first place. So there's a big distinction between ethics and welfare. And I could see people having welfare arguments with each other and not winning, or no one winning, like it's just a big argument, because what they're not talking about is the underlying ethics behind it, which is where they're coming from. And as a wildlife manager, we're always providing advice to government on how you do this or how you do that and what's the most appropriate management strategies. And one of the things wildlife managers collectively have sucked at and still do is we haven't given managers and policymakers what I would call the ethical tools to defend or support those practices. So when a decision maker is getting bombarded by a group of people who've seen something stupid on TikTok, the decision maker has got nothing to go back to defend or support those practices. And the wildlife managers of the world were saying, well, we need to do this to save the rhino or save the shorebirds or whatever. But that argument is not flying with a public who are not speaking that ethical language. They're speaking a different ethical language. So I started to realize that if we're to support best practice wildlife, which leads to good biodiversity conservation, if we're not going to lose the tools that are available to us to do that, and we want to preserve species, we're going to have to engage in these ethical debates or whatever and justify the practices or point out why these things are ethical or whatever. Otherwise, we risk losing the argument. And if you risk losing the argument, we're going to lose species.
So obviously it's quite a daunting field to dive into. As a wildlife manager, obviously us going through graduate school, you don't get a class in ethics.
No.
You almost have to explore it on your own. And when you start looking at things like, consequentialism and I don't even know how to say it correctly, deontology, right?
Yeah.
It's
Animal
like,
rights people would be familiar with.
I'll just stop right there. Like, I don't even understand those two terms.
Yeah.
So, like, how am I supposed to argue if I can't even understand the terms?
That's right. And with respect to those, they're philosophical fields in their own right. There's people who get PhDs and doctorates and spend their whole careers just in one of those fields, debating and discussing and philosophizing about what that field means, let alone taking two different fields and putting them together, or taking 8, which is what we did, and then applying it to this question of killing. So it's a very complex space. That's what philosophers do. They philosophize. So I found that to be important. I'll give you an example, like a concrete example of where the rubber hits the road for this topic. So a common thing across islands is you'll have some sort of invasive pest like a cat or a rat or a goat or something wiping out some sort of animal on an island. And often what will happen is you'll get an invasive species pop in and managers will launch into action and say, well, we need to get rid of this smaller number of invasive species in order to save the larger number of shorebirds or reptiles or whatever it is that they're trying to protect. So what would happen is they'd say, well, we want to throw out poison or shoot some or do whatever to get rid of let's say the rats. We want to get rid of the rats to save the shorebirds. And then an animal rights type person or some other type of philosophy, conservation philosophy, would come along and say, but you're violating the rights of the rat. Like you're doing bad things to this rat. How can you justify that? It's cruel, it's unethical, blah, blah, blah. And so they would make essentially a claim that would say it's cruel or unethical to do this thing to the rat. And then the wildlife manager would respond with saying something like, well, I have to kill these 100 rats in order to save the 1,000 shorebirds, which is a net benefit of 900 animals. And that answer would be unsatisfactory to the person who said, you shouldn't be doing this to the rat. And what's happening there philosophically is someone is coming along with an animal rights-based ethic to say you're violating the rights of the rat. And the wildlife manager is responding with a consequentialist-based ethic, which is just like maths, and saying, but the net benefit of this is good. But neither of those two, they're speaking different ethical languages, and they're not reaching agreement or understanding amongst each other. So my thought was, well, rather than have people talking over each other with different ethical languages, how about we make a case or show how under each of these ethical philosophies you can make an argument to support intentional animal killing under that philosophy. So next time when they say, we don't like you killing the rats, you could say, well, which ethical philosophy are you coming from? I'm coming from this one. All right, well, then I'll give you a response based inside that ethical philosophy. There's my rationale. And then at least you're speaking the same language and you might be able to make some progress.
Mm-hmm. So this paper that I reached out to you on, it's called The Ethical Arguments That Support Intentional Animal Killing. Well, I think the most impressive thing to start with about this article is the fact that you have 47 co-authors from all over the world. You know, people that have been on this podcast before. Janetta Cillier have been, Sam Shepard have been on this podcast. Sam Ferreira is about to be on this podcast.
Well, say hello to him for me.
I will. I will. How did that come about? That you've got all these guys that are like unbelievably pulling in the same direction?
Well, unsurprisingly, wildlife managers are not the only people grappling with this issue. People involved in medicine and animal use in medicine and sort of human research, medical research, dealing with this issue. People in agriculture, supplying food to the world, deal with this issue. People in the sort of religious space and animals used for like ritual slaughter or some sort of religious exercise, they deal with this issue. Wildlife managers, conservationists, all sorts of people, zoos and veterinarians deal with the issue. What do I do with this animal? I've got a white rhino. Do I kill it or do I patch it up and get it back out there? Like there's lots of people involved in animal use industries or fields that interact with animals that deal with this issue of killing animals. And there is a distinction to be made between, well, in the ethics philosophy world, they make the distinction between intentional animal killing. So I go out there with a gun and shoot something, versus unintentional animal killing, which is, I don't know, if I build a house and chase away all the animals that lived on my patch of ground. It wasn't intentional, but it happened anyway. They draw the distinction. So we specifically tried to focus on the intentional forms, which are the forms that get everybody upset the most. And when you do that, you realize there are people all over the world in all sorts of disciplines who are dealing with all the same stuff. And I felt that it was important to reach out to as many as possible to be involved, because I don't know everything. And the things that I think are important may not be important in the other side of the world. So I wanted to test the limits of sort of my own knowledge and experience with things as well, so that when you put all of it together, you've got something that's broadly applicable and not something that's hyper-focused on, you know, an issue that's not important to everybody. So I think for me...
Did it like spider web? Like you knew maybe like 10 of them and you're like, hey, would you be interested in this paper? Do you know anybody else that'd be interested in this paper? And just went,
absolutely. Yeah, so this ethics one is sort of part 2 of the killing one, which we did in 2023. Right. And at that time, we got a bunch of authors all over the place. And when we started to build out that first paper, we always imagined having, you know, part A and part B. But if an interesting story, this one from 2023, I started out with 6 reasons humans kill animals. And then you bring other people on, you're like, oh yeah, we really need to add a 7th. That's different. We really need to add an 8th. Oh yeah, that's different. And it went out to 10.
Ended up with 10.
And then someone even said number 11. And I'm like, man, this is never going to stop. We got to stop it at 10. But if we had an 11th, it would have been political killing, which is just killing animals purely for the sake of politics, just to appease somebody else for no other reason. You're just doing it to appease somebody else. And there's examples of that too. But we started with the 10 reasons, and that built a network of people. And then when it come time to finishing off part B of that exercise, which is this ethics paper, I said to everybody, hey, reach out to everybody in your own networks We don't want to be an echo chamber of people who feel the same way about things. And a lot of the debates that readers would probably have in their own head when they read our paper, we had amongst our co-authorship as well. There's people in there that are right in on their hunting, and there's people in there that are very opposed to hunting. There's quite a diverse mix of people in that ethical group, in that authorship group. But one thing they all agree on is the principles and things that we outline in these papers. So I think having a large co-author group is sort of testament to the broadness of the issue and to the sort of commonalities amongst people with different backgrounds and different views. We're not all the same on that thing, but we are all the same in our sort of passion or interest in getting this stuff right.
So in this last paper in 2025, and we'll link this in the show notes, the ethical arguments that support intentional animal killing, you sort of set out that there's really 8 frameworks.
There's lots more than that.
Looks like.
Yeah, there's plenty of ethical philosophies and views on how the world works. And if you interviewed everybody, you'd probably find out there's about 8 billion different ethical philosophies. Everybody's a little bit different, right? But you can group like-minded people into various forms of ethics or philosophies or frameworks, depending on what you want to call it. And so we used 8 things that people would be familiar with. Animal rights is something that people be familiar with, or virtue ethics is certainly very popular. People be familiar with that. Environmental ethics, it's the whole system that's important. Humans and animals all together. And then there's religious stuff as well. But there are billions of people in the world who derive their morals from their religious beliefs. You can't ignore that. That's how many societies and the majority of Earth's population view things, through a religious lens. We took a bunch of these and said, all right, well, how can we make an argument to support intentional animal killing under each of these? And we created some examples of those arguments. I hesitate to say, it's not like Frodo's ring. It's not like one ring to rule them all. And if you had just the right argument, you could beat every other argument. It's not like that. It's more just to point out that when someone says, that's unethical, I don't like what you're doing, that's unethical, the response should be, well, maybe to you, or maybe under that circumstance, or maybe under that philosophy, but maybe it is ethical under a different philosophy or a different framework or different time and place. And if we live in a world where you do have this sort of multiverse of ethical views, what do we do then? Can I tell you that you can't do something? Can I go to Africa and tell someone in Botswana who has got no electricity and no running water and is eating off the land, can I tell them that they can't kill the elephant? Like, what do you get when now 2 different philosophies clash? Which one's right? Is the Jew right, or is the Muslim right? Is the animal rights person right, or is the virtue ethicist right? There is no right or wrong, right? There's just different ways of looking at it. And so the wildlife manager says, all right, can we move past all this and move forward towards something we agree on, which is usually something around welfare. We want animals to have a good life while they're alive. Most people, unless you're a psychopath, want animals to have a good life while they're alive. We can all agree on that.
Right. We could absolutely go through all of the 8, but I think in your experience, we've already talked about one as an example earlier, the consequentialism argument or the consequentialist ethic. Give me some more. Give me an example. Let's just talk a little bit more about consequentialism, and then maybe if there's one or two others that you're just like, man, this is what comes up more. I guess maybe what I'm trying to get at is what are the common things? Because there's going to be of the 8. Hey, these 4, you see this a lot more than these 4, right?
In the wildlife field specifically, to me, I think there's 3 that kind of stand out. or four, sorry. There's four that stand out in that sort of wildlife conservation sort of space. One of them is environmental ethics. The
Okay.
other is consequentialism. One is deontology, or what is popularly known as animal rights. And the other is what we would call virtue ethics. And I'll
Okay.
explain a little bit in summary for each one. Environmental ethics is really about prioritizing the sort of collective environment as a whole. What's good for the land is an acceptable thing to do. So if it means taking out some rats on an island and that's good for the rest of the fauna and flora on the island, well, then that's okay. It's got to be good for the environment, or at the very least, not harmful to the environment. But if it's something that is harmful to the environment, like, I don't know, tipping some toxic waste into the river, environmental ethics is not going to support that. It's not good for the environment. But the distinguishing feature there is that you're
How is that
taking,
different? How is environmental ethical argument different from a consequentialist argument? They seem very, very close.
well, you've touched on something that we talk about in here, is they all end up in the same place, which is permission to engage in intentional animal killing. They are very close. It's just that their rationale is different. So I don't know, you type into Google Maps, how do I drive to New York, or how do I drive to Alice Springs?
Mm.
It'll give you three different options, and you can take three different routes to get to the same place. That's what the sort of ethics is. What we tried to show here is you can take multiple pathways and arrive in the same place. But the distinguishing feature for environmental ethics is that it prioritizes the group of organisms, the collective ecosystem, over the individual parts of that ecosystem.
Not just the bird that you mentioned as an example from the consequentialist perspective.
Yeah, you need to you take everything into consideration, plants and animals, and people for that matter, because we're a part of those systems. Consequentialist is best thought of as dispassionate, pure maths. If I have to take out 100 rats to save 1,000 shorebirds, that's a net benefit of 900 animals. The maths works out great. If I have to kill a small number of predators on a sheep or cattle station in order to save large numbers of sheep or cattle, that's totally acceptable. It's the consequences that matter most, which is why it's called consequentialism. And it really comes back to that just sort of calculation. If for this amount of harm or killing I'm doing, is there a net benefit with those things? And most of the Western world's policy frameworks, legislative frameworks, they don't state this, but they revolve around consequentialism. If I have to get an animal ethics permit, is what we call them in Australia, but if you're doing some sort of research, you'll often have to get a permit from somewhere. That committee is tasked with assessing, if I'm going to harm these animals in this way, is it worth doing it? Is the benefit of this research worth the harm you're doing? They're operating under a consequentialist framework.
No, it's exactly, for instance, and we have an example right now with the Utah Department of Natural Resources. They had already sort of removed all regulations associated with mountain lion harvest, mountain lion take. But now they went 3 steps forward in a number of watersheds and have now engaged predator removal specialists to go into those specific watersheds. No seasons, no take, do whatever you want, however you want, with the consequence, with the hope that the consequence is a better mule deer population.
Yeah. So managers may say, all right, you think of my death games. The managers are saying we want to tip the balance in favor of the prey. That's the management decision, and they're enacting some sort of actions to try and achieve that outcome.
Yep.
And they, like from a management point of view, you can almost be sort of ambivalent or whatever about what your objective is. You know, that's their objective, right? Or if that's your objective, now you've got a bunch of tools available to you to achieve that objective. Well, which one are you going to use? Well, we're going to send everybody in with guns. All right, okay, that's your objective. So the consequence part is philosophically, the mechanics work differently to environmental ethics, because consequentialism doesn't necessarily care about the environment per se. They just care about the maths. Is there going to be a net benefit from this thing? And if you can demonstrate a net benefit, then it's morally good.
Okay.
Deontology is very different, or animal rights is very different. It's about rights and duties. Some things have certain rights, and then other things have duties to respect those rights. So we might say that the elephant in Botswana has a right to life. Humans have a duty to respect that right. So if I go and kill that elephant or harm it in some way, I'm violating its right, and I'm violating my duty. I'm not living up to my duty. And so whether or not something is morally right or wrong depends on whether or not people with duties or animals with duties are respecting the rights of others. And in that world, and people, readers or listeners will be familiar to this, is that people in that space often want to give animals the same rights that humans have. A right to life, a right to freedom, a right to safety, freedom from stress, all those sorts of things. And so if to the extent that you do that and you grant animals all those rights, humans now then have a duty to respect that right. So they would say that I can't just walk into the bush and shoot an elephant or a mountain lion or whatever because I'm violating that animal's rights, even if it had good consequences and even if it was fine for the environment. You're still doing the wrong thing morally. Virtue ethics is separate again.
Before we get on to virtue ethics,
yeah,
how in the world that you've live in and creating the counter argument to say under these various ethical philosophies, there is support for intentional killing.
In some cases, yeah.
I would feel that the deontological argument seems to be the hardest to justify from an intentional killing perspective.
It depends on the scenario. So there's a lot of nuance in all of these. And I'm sure you could find some very, the grey-haired professors of philosophy that teach in each of these things. And they will give you a counter view, which is expected, right? Because even within each of these philosophies, there's a lot of debate around the limits of the rules that they impose or the principles and where they apply. So again, this is that Frodo's ring. I'm not saying this is Frodo's ring. I'm just saying that you can make an argument under these philosophies for some of these actions.
So what would be the argument for intentional? What would be the argument for intentional killing under the deontological ethic?
Yeah. So one of the example that we gave in here was where we have it's called the mini ride principle. There's kind of two principles that are most useful inside animal ethics. Inside deontology for us. The mini ride principle is more just saying, I'll use an example to probably highlight a little bit better.
Okay.
In the literature, they give the example of a bunch of miners trapped underground, and you need to go rescue the trapped miners underground. You say, all right, it's going to take. We have to kill one person to get the other 49 out. There's 50 miners underground. One of them's got to die to get out. And the mini ride principle is really just an attempt to say it's better to kill one and save the many, or kill a small number and save the many, than it is to let all the many die just to avoid the one. But there's a catch, and it's an important catch, is when everyone is going to die. So the case of the miners, they're all going to die. That conclusion is a given. So given that conclusion, we kill one and save 49, or we don't kill the one and save the other. The mini ride principle essentially says it's better to kill the one and save the 49 when they're all going to die. Now, if you're to try and apply that to wildlife management, we can be tempted to just stop at the first half and say killing a few saves many. That's a consequentialist argument. And often we can't forget, if I'm applying a deontological point of view, that the second part of that principle is very important, which is when they're all going to die. So it might have greater application for a place like on an island, where if you let the invasive species go, it really will wipe out everything. Or in a predator-prey scenario where you have a particular predator that's going to eat every single one of your prey, it really will kill them all. But it might not apply to things like trophy hunting or some other form of intentional killing. And we describe this in the paper, is that there are limits to these principles and where they can be applied. It's not that the mini-road principle always applies to every form of killing, but there'll be some where it does. And I think for policymakers, decision makers, understanding the limits of those underneath each framework is important. So if I'm going to write a policy or a piece of legislation or a management plan that says I'm going to do this, I would want to do an assessment of these to know which philosophies are in my corner and which philosophies are not in my corner. And you know where you're likely to get shade from and where you're not going to get shade from.
Okay. Sorry, virtue ethics?
Virtue ethics is, in some ways, it's a bit sort of fluffy. It's how you feel. Virtue ethics is more about your feelings. And so to live consistently with virtue ethics, you need to do things that are consistent with the virtues. Honesty, integrity, charity, there's mercy, justice, there's a whole bunch of different virtues. In the animal space, we often talk about compassion and mercy. We want to treat animals compassionately. The example given in the philosophical literature for for virtue ethics is picture yourself back in the Second World War and you're hiding some Jews in your basement and the Nazis come along and say, do you have any Jews in your basement? Now, if I'm a virtue ethicist and I'm trying to be honest and I'm putting honesty at the top of my list of virtues, I would say, yes, I have Jews in my basement. And now those Jews are going to die and I'm going to die too. So being honest in that case leads to a great amount of harm. The virtuous thing to do in that scenario would be to lie or to violate that virtue and say, no, I don't have Jews, because then it leads to no harm or a better welfare outcome. So one of the things that's really important to understand about virtue ethics is there are no hard, fast rules like animal rights in virtue ethics. There's always exceptions to the rule where it might be more virtuous to not follow honesty or compassion. A good example is an animal with a broken leg on the side of the road or a busted wing or something. What am I going to do? Say, I'm going to be compassionate and walk away and I'm not going to kill it? Or are we going to be compassionate and say, well, I'm going to kill you. I'm sorry, I might not have all the right veterinary drugs and tools. I'm just going to go find a rock. It's not going to be great, but it's better than dying over the next 3 days. Mm-hmm. So you would, out of compassion, you would do something harmful. Mm-hmm. And you can apply that principle to lots of different scenarios where you're motivated by compassion to minimize harm.
Mm. Okay. And so, lastly?
Well, you can see with all of these, virtue ethics, I'm motivated by compassion.
We got the four. That's right. Yeah. We got the four. Yep.
Yeah. Motivated by compassion to minimize harm, and it ends up with the dead bird on the side of the road. Or through deontology, I might say, well, all of these animals on this island are going to die. If I don't do something about it, I'm justified in doing something about it. Environmental ethics would say, well, I can do something about those rats on the island too. And the consequentialists would certainly say the same thing. So I can get there through multiple routes that all arrive. Now, what that does to me is it almost in some ways says ethics is not important. Let's just bypass the ethics then if we know we're all going to get to the same place. And now let's have a debate about what's the right tool to use. Which tool is the least harmful? Do I use poison? Do I use guns? Do I push them all off a cliff into the water?
The least harmful is not an ethics question, it's a welfare question.
It's a welfare question. It's not about ethics, because we would have already gone through the process to know that I'm justified in doing something. Now let's have a discussion about what is the least harmful way to achieve this. And everybody can agree on that. We all want to do that. Nobody wants to be most harmful. So if I have a choice of 2 bullets, and let's say I want to shoot an elephant, well, I can get a big caliber rifle and shoot it in the head, or I can get a small caliber rifle and shoot it in the knee. It's still going to die, but I wouldn't be justified in blowing its leg off or blowing its mouth off, even though I'm achieving the same outcome, which is ethically justified, which is to kill the elephant. So where you've got a choice of 2 tools and one hurts more and one hurts less, I'm not going to be justified in using the one that hurts less, even though I have ethical permission, if you like, to kill it in the first place. So I think debate should focus on the tools that we use and whether or not they're effective in the sense of reducing the harm, the management objectives, rather than getting into arguments about ethics, which just goes nowhere because everybody's got a different philosophy.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It really, really is. And I think it's conversations like these that people can listen to, and also like that podcast you sent, which was which was amazing. That the AI generated that summary, number one, and then two people, and the AI obviously generated a summary of there's person A and person B talking to each other, and broke it down so simply that I was like, man, okay, I don't have to be scared about deontological ethical arguments, which I am, and most people are, and consequentialist ethical arguments.
Put the link to it. I actually, in your chat, I actually found that really useful. So I didn't prepare that. A reader who read the paper, I don't know, maybe didn't want to read the whole paper, so he did an AI summary of my paper in the form of this 15-minute podcast between two fictitious people. And they sent it to me and said, is this accurate? You know, has it explained what you were trying to say?
It was so brilliant.
Perfect, right? Perfect. And in fact, side note, as I was listening to it, because I listen to a lot of podcasts, as I was listening to it, I forgot almost what it was, and I thought I was listening to two people having a conversation about my paper. And when you work in a space like this, you get misrepresented and mischaracterized all the time. So as I was listening to this podcast, this fake podcast, I'm thinking, man, these two people have really understood what I was trying to say. They haven't misquoted me. They haven't mischaracterized my arguments. They're doing a very good job having a discussion. And then it wasn't until the end I'm like, oh, wait, of course they didn't misquote me. It's me that they're talking, like that's speaking in a different voice. Like it's very believable, and it's scary where the AI stuff's going these days. It's a very
were the people's voices rendering. AI too?
It's all just made up. It's all just like animation. I don't know what in that world.
Like you even had me
totally fake,
because I thought the woman and the guy talking were actual real people.
No, it's Siri talking to whoever. Like it's robots. Like it's just computers talking to each other. It just sounds real.
Oh man,
we're going to be out of a job. I don't need to go to a conference and explain things anymore. I just need to attach an AI summary to every paper that's written. And we won't need to do podcasts.
That's coming for sure. 100% that's coming.
It's actually as a method of distilling the content of a scientific paper, it's a very powerful tool. It's a very powerful tool. Puts it into the hands of the layperson. It's really cool.
Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, we'll definitely try and put that link in the show notes. Ben, man, I appreciate this. I know this is probably not going to be the last time that you are on this podcast. And I hope
happy to talk
be interested in coming back. And I know you sent me like 30 minutes before us jumping on this podcast, an article that you got published in Shooting Australia or Shooter Australia or something about your young boy shooting, coming into hunting, using a tutu just like you had. Just like your father had taught you, you were teaching your boy now, right?
Many years ago, I sat next to Norman Owen Smith, a Godfather legend.
Excuse me.
You know him, right?
Excuse me. Listen.
Okay.
I was in the zoology department being taught by Norman Owen Smith. Okay. And now I'm on an email chain with Norman Owen Smith as a 45-year-old ecologist. I'm like, Norman and I are debating each other? This is awesome.
So I happened to be sitting next to Norman, catching the crumbs that fell off his table while we were having a conversation about all this sort of stuff a few years ago. And he said something to me that was very profound. We were talking about hunting and, killing animals. And he said, what's not natural about a human walking across the savannah and killing an animal? What's not natural about that? That is the most natural thing. People have been walking across the savannah killing animals since people and animals were invented. It is the most natural thing. Now, you can have a debate around, throwing poisons out of helicopters. That's unnatural. Or often in hunting, you have a debate around, it's too easy because you've got a gun. Everybody should go back to a spear and, put the odds a bit more better. Like you can have those sorts of discussions. But as far as an ethical discussion around, is it acceptable to kill an animal? What's not natural about that?
Yeah,
So
you're right.
um,
You're right.
I think there's a lot of discussions to be had around the 10 reasons that we give for people killing animals and about the ethical justifications for each of those reasons and how we can live in a world where we need to get more comfortable with ethics and welfare and stuff because there's no way of getting out of it. We're in it.
Yeah, it's you brought something up in this in what you just said that it's if you had to ask me, Robbie, like break down what's the top three things that you get when you talk about like defending hunting or defending sustainable use of wildlife. You hit one of them, which was why don't you make it more fair on the animal and remove the high-powered weapon and go back to using a spear, a knife, or your hands? And often those individuals are your animal rights kind of individuals that have not given any thought to their welfare justification of what they're asking you to do. And my response to them, it's crazy. My response to them is, hey, we have a rifle to be as efficient and effective in our killing as possible. So you're suggesting to me that you want me to inflict more pain now. You want me to inflict more suffering.
Do you want to go back to clubbing seals? Or are you happy with shooting them? Do you want to go back with 50 people with spears bringing down an elephant? Or are you happy with just one shot? We see this, right? And it illustrates the difference between the ethics and the welfare. Let's say you were having a good conversation with someone who felt that way. And you said, all right, I'm going to go back to the club then. Or I'll go back to the spear. And what you'll quickly find is they go, no, I don't want you to kill it. And that's because they're using welfare as a Trojan horse for an ethical argument, which is I don't want you to kill it. So I've tried at least in some part to bypass ethics by saying, you're never going to get out of these ethics arguments. We both agree on good welfare. How about we shift towards good welfare? Because I can hold hands with you on that one. I don't want to see someone bring down an elephant with 50 spears. If they need to bring down an elephant, we'll do it nicely.
Yeah, agreed.
Most people would be in that corner.
Yeah, agreed. Well, my man, I'll let you go. I know it's almost the middle of the day for you. It is closing in on getting savages in baths and beds and stuff like that on my end. But, man, I appreciate you. I really appreciate you coming on here. I look forward to us interacting much more in the future.
Definitely. Happy to do it anytime. It was a pleasure.